I'm Tom Pappert, and this is The Honest Media. I'm here with D. August Promnitz via Skype, and he wrote an article for his website, ManTalk, titled, "The Rise of Big Internet Means the Death of Free Speech." And I fundamentally agree with him in spite of everybody who says it's private business. Tell me a little bit about the website first, and then let's go right into the article.
Well, ManTalk was founded by our CIO and our current editor-in-chief by the name of Mark Bassa from Australia, who is living as an expat in Denmark right now. But it was created with the intention of being sort of a conservative reply to Gentleman's Quarterly. The same kind of content of, applying to male culture, but the difference being instead of a very severe liberal bent, we tend to lean towards conservatism and, in some cases, libertarianism.
And that's really something I think the market really needs. Okay, tell me about what is big internet? How do you define big internet in your article, and how is it damaging?
Well, big internet is another large institution that tends to put ordinary people as a bottom priority. In the case of things like big business or big government or big media, large mainstream organizations that do hamper down on individuals. It's the same with big internet. It's large sites that have a lot of shares, a lot of stock, and a lot of clout. Sites like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, search engines, and groups like Google. They have a large amount of size, influence, and a lot of people who come onto their sites that are both liberal and conservative. But they have the ability to control the traffic that comes into it, and we are starting to see how they will very often silence conservative groups or anyone that they find to be in disagreement with it, or what they will deem or categorize as hate speech.
And you mentioned hate speech. From what I have been able to understand, it's kind of like the term racist. I think it was Thomas Sowell. What is racist? What is a racist? Well, it's a Republican who just won an argument against a Democrat. What is hate speech?
Hate speech depends. Do you mean on the actual definition or the liberal definition?
Either, and actually give us both. What is hate speech in real life, and then in fancy liberal la-la land?
Well, actual hate speech would be, for example, something that's intended to incite violence against others or to demonize an entire group of people or a large group of people, calling them something like, I don't know, a basket of deplorables.
Or maybe saying, gee, we ought to get somebody to go shoot Snowden or Assange or whatever.
Exactly.
And what is liberal hate speech in the Newspeak dictionary?
Well, gee, the crime rate is really high among the black community.
It's a good idea. Or maybe a nice Leslie Jones meme, right?
Precisely.
And now the main opposition I come up against whenever I bring this up in my show, in my personal life, in my academic life, people like to say, but it's a private business. Isn't it their right to censor anything that they want?
Oh, does that mean that if I have a bakery, I can refuse to make a wedding cake for a gay wedding? Or
Bake the Nazi cake, Gary Johnson.
Exactly.
I think that's a very valid point. And how do you think, what do we do to fight this big internet, or can we even fight big internet?
Well, going back to what you said about big business or private industry, the thing is, we honestly can use that against them. For example, we saw this with Derek Ackerman's Facebook site. And I know he's gotten another ban on Disdain for Pleb or another post block, but the fact is, whether they like us or not, conservatives are here to stay. The alt-right is here to stay. And the fact of the matter is, though we don't make up as large of a group to use social media and to use internet as, say, liberals, we still do have significant clout. And when we do complain and when we do threaten to go elsewhere or to take our money and give it to someone else or start our own things, these businesses are going to take notice of that. At the end of the day, they may promote socialism, they may promote globalism, and things like this, but at the end of the day, they are capitalists.
What do you think of the implications of these big social media websites, Facebook, Twitter, Google, which is YouTube, and about a million other things? What do you think about their frequent commitments? They're in absolute lockstep with government. The governments of the European Union say we need to prevent bad speech against Muslims, against the migrants. And Facebook, I think, was one of the first people to sign on and say, yep, we're going to ban anybody who says anything bad. What are the implications of this?
Well, one of the big reasons for that is because sites like Facebook and Google and Twitter and YouTube, they have a lot of people who have accounts that are people who live in the European Union. So they try to go with that compliance. But the big implication is that, one, they're using their definition of hate speech, and two, they are suppressing actual fact. They've gotten to a point where fact is considered hate speech. To say that Islam is a very violent ideology is considered hate speech. To say that the rape rates have gone up in Sweden, or to say that yes, the attacks in Munich and in Nice and in Paris were religiously motivated. This isn't an example of just someone with a mental illness, although one might say that Salafism or other forms of radical Islam could be considered a mental illness. The point is, they're doing it because they follow an ideology. They're following a book that has as much anti-Semitism as Mein Kampf.
And you bring up Mein Kampf. This is how I've previously described to people the difference between hate speech and what the liberals, I like to call it hate facts. In Mein Kampf, Hitler writes, the Jewish people own a disproportionate amount of the German media. Now, that's a fact, or was a fact. I don't know anymore, but it used to be a fact.
Oh, it's still
and
a fact.
Hate speech. And well, there you go. And hate speech then is when he says, therefore we have to kill them. Fact, this thing exists. Hate, kill them all. Is that about accurate?
Yeah, that's actually pretty accurate. They try to blanket the whole statement as hate speech. Now, obviously, I don't agree with what Adolf Hitler wrote in Mein Kampf, but to say that, yes, there is a very large amount of media or banking that's owned by one certain group, that's just pointing out a fact. For example, and we've gotten so heavily conditioned. I was talking to people at work a while back, and I said, well, Jewish people or Jewish culture had a big part in the Russian Revolution. And I had to immediately walk back and say, that's not anti-Semitism. That's just stating that Lenin and Trotsky and a lot of these leaders did happen to be of this certain group. It's just pointing out something from history.
And you're right, it is this kind of conditioning that if you bring up it's hate facts. People say, I've had this woman professor explain to me before, facts can absolutely hate. If a fact is against a certain population, then it can absolutely hate. And that's lunacy, right? I mean, a fact just sits there doing its own confined thing. It's what you do with this information where the hate comes in.
Well, the big thing is, we're afraid of these realities because they confront our worldviews. They confront what makes us comfortable. So it's easy just to ban the things we don't want to hear than embrace and accept it, or to actually do research and challenge it.
So now you brought this up. How come, and I don't know if it's just a perceived difference or if it's true, how come there are more liberals on social media than conservatives?
Well, because social media is geared towards younger people more often. There's going to be a far larger number of people who are younger who are using these kinds of sites. Boomers or older generations who tend to be more conservative are going to tend to avoid these things because they've gone years without them, they've gone their entire lives without them, and they don't need them now. Now, of course, there are a lot of people who do. My parents are both boomers, and they do social media, or my mother does. My dad keeps an account, but an example of this is he never uses it. My dad just goes out and talks to people at work.
And I always think about this. This isn't directly related to your article, but NBC loves to tout their NBC SurveyMonkey poll. And I always assume this is, a scientific poll that SurveyMonkey just helps to use, where they get a sample size from all across the United States and different demographics. And then I did some digging, and it turns out that the SurveyMonkey polls are all done of SurveyMonkey users. And I sit to myself and I think, okay, how many baby boomers who aren't working for Fortune 500 companies are really using SurveyMonkey? It's got to be young people, and so no wonder there's a liberal bent on the polls.
That's very true, but one of the bigger examples of this for me was the Reuters Ipsos poll in terms of dishonest polling. This was a poll that had Hillary Clinton up by about 10 points early on, or even higher, just these ridiculous numbers with Clinton in the lead. And then something happened. Donald Trump started to beat Hillary Clinton even in these polls. It got that bad. So what they did was they changed their algorithm or their method to give Hillary the lead back. And then, of course, just a couple of weeks ago, they released a new poll where Donald Trump beat her in this new survey method as well. So it was a definite, I think, wake-up call towards not just Reuters, but towards everyone in general that I think the polls are dishonest.
Is big internet easier to fight than big media was in its heyday?
It's going to be much harder. Much harder. The thing is, we had internet itself as a means to undercut big media. Now, they're going after the very thing we use to do the undercutting. So they are going to set up obstacles in things like Facebook, and which has gotten so bad that we have the term zucking now. And you've experienced it with your site. I've experienced it with my own page. Other people like Derek Ackerman, Lauren Southern, and again, though it was Twitter, Milo Yiannopoulos, have all been either banned or temporarily blocked or other things of this nature. The best way, or the only way I can think of to beat it, other than what I had mentioned earlier of using our clout to basically raise hell and thus threaten their investments and go after their pocketbook, the other way is to create our own search engines, to create our own social media sites. Imagine a type of Facebook kind of social media site that's run by conservatives or that's run by libertarians that allow not only conservatives to speak but liberals as well. Imagine a video streaming site, the like of YouTube, that does allow for videos that are critical of militant Islam or of feminism or I should say third wave campus feminism or any of these other ideas or the body positivity movement that won't see your ad revenues shut down because we don't have these ridiculous policy guidelines. And they're not really guidelines. They're just ways to enforce progressive dogma.
What do you see as the implications of potentially losing ICANN, that's where domain names are registered, to an international agency at the end of September?
It has the potential to be an absolute disaster. In fact, I can't see anything good coming out of it. We're talking, for one thing, about taking something that was invented in the United States by the United States, not in the same way of, cultural appropriation of a white guy can't wear dreadlocks because black guy made it or whatever, but we're talking about something that was made by the United States government by America. It is thus America's intellectual property. And we're having it sold over to a global community or handed over to a global community. And one of the biggest problems with this, the biggest implications is it means that hostile or totalitarian regimes like Saudi Arabia or Iran are going to get a say in what we get to say in America about the internet. It makes sense that the United States would have the internet if we're talking free speech, because we were built on the idea of liberty, of being able to say what you want to say or believe what you want to believe. But this is not something that occurs to countries like Saudi Arabia or to Iran or to China. And the biggest, one of the biggest things that I point out to people who ask me about ICANN is, imagine a country like Iran that is our enemy, that has declared us the great Satan and has been at war with us for nearly 40 years. Imagine writing an article that criticizes the Iranian government, and you're writing it as an American in the United States. If they have as much control over it as anyone else, they have the ability to say, no, you can't write that. We're talking about an enemy country having the ability to decide what America can or cannot say about the Iranian government, or the Saudis having that same say, or the Chinese having that same say. This is something so bad, so ridiculous, and such a globalistic disaster that even Bill Clinton has come out against it.
And I know Ted Cruz is one of the conservatives leading the fight against it, and I've personally promised if Ted manages to pull it off, I'll never call him Lion Ted again.
Oh, he'll totally redeem himself. Okay, not totally, but...
As much as that man can at this point. He may even get himself another term in Texas. He may get the goodwill back. Well, August, thank you so much for joining me today. I want to give you the final word and let you tell us where we can find your writing, what we can do to support ManTalk, and give you the final word in general.
Well, you can find my work at mantalk.mobi. There is a subscription for it to be able to read the entire article for any story. However, that is actually only small. It's I think $1 or $2 a month, so it's cheap. And the last thing I'd like to say is just continue to post, continue to inform. Don't be afraid to step out of these echo chambers we were talking about and engage others. And for the love of God, though you are fighting big internet, don't be on the internet all day.
Good advice, good advice. Like one Trump supporter said a few months ago, I think in California, do not let them intimidate you. All right, August, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.